Hi guys and welcome back. Today I'm working on this little watercolor painting. This one I had so much fun working on from the very beginning sketch to the final, so I'm just excited to talk a bit about the process, the inspirations, the things that went into this piece that made me really enjoy it. But yeah, I worked on the sketch during the holiday when I was hanging out with my family, which was awesome because normally I try to get work done or try to draw when I'm hanging out with them, but usually it does not work, but this time it did. It was something that I can look back on and it reminds me of being there with them and enjoying that time with them, but also still having drawn something and got something down. I don't know if that's like that for any of you. I think it probably is, but oftentimes when I draw a piece, I remember a lot about what was happening at that time. So when I look back at it, I get all of those emotions and memories, or if I'm listening to a specific type of music, I remember the music or the audio book or whatever was happening at that time. And it's kind of interesting being able to look back at past pieces, and it almost works like a journal in a way where it brings back all those memories and brings me back to that time in my life. So that one was really fun, and it does connect with something that makes me really happy. And it's a piece that honestly, it just felt really cozy to work on from the very beginning. So this one is based just around someone taking a nap, which is something that I really enjoy. I love a really good nap. So it was fun to just dive in and create a character that was just really relaxed. I wanted to make sure that it did actually shine through that kind of atmosphere and feeling. That's something that I do struggle with a lot more than I would like, where I want it to have an atmosphere, but I don't always achieve it. But I think this one I actually did for once. I actually went a very different way than I think my initial gut reaction would be for the colors. But yeah, I'll talk about that in a bit. I just had a lot of fun just focusing on a piece that was revolving around this really nostalgic, cozy kind of emotion, and being able to get lost in that in something that I personally really love and enjoy. But yeah, the colors, like I said, I was not actually sure what colors I would go with when I was sketching her out. I had originally in my head, in my notes, when I jotted down some jumping off points for the sketch, that I could go with some like rich jewel tone colors, so it would feel like this almost winter den where she would have all these like lush fabrics. And then I also thought about maybe going with more like pastels, so it has more of like this hazy, dreamy look to it. And I got home and I was transferring over the sketch and thinking it through, and I was looking at posts on Pinterest actually for different color ideas and inspirations, and I have a few pictures that I have saved over there that have this like emerald forest green with this mustard yellow. And I really love that color combination. And it spoke to me, where I already had a little bit in my head where I like the idea of this like velvety green for potentially the background, but leaning more into having this yellow seemed really perfect for the atmosphere that I wanted. And I think it's kind of interesting that yellow has really grown on me, and I hadn't noticed that it was, because I used to just not like it at all. It used to be my least favorite color, but I found that the older I get, the more I can see it in a different light, and I love the way that this kind of yellow, something a little bit more desaturated and mustardy, can be combined with other colors. So yeah, it was exciting to use a color palette that I had in my head for a little bit, and I'd considered it but never actually utilized it in a piece. So when I was working out the colors, I did lean mostly into the green-yellow combination, but of course I had to figure out the other colors that would be in this piece, like the hair color and skin color, and actually that's about it. Maybe a little bit of the variation of how I would vary the greens in the background, but I decided to go with a slightly more natural hair color than I usually do. This actually ended up being more truly gray than I had in my color comp. I actually had it more of this like ashy brown color, which I love. I think I definitely want to do a character that really does have the initial idea spark for the hair color. I think it's a really beautiful hair color. But anyways, it did end up being a little bit more on the gray side, a little bit less of a brown and more of a gray, which is a bit more unnatural for a character of this age. But I also went more desaturated with her skin as well. I did lean more into that, letting things be a little bit more subdued than I normally do when I'm using my watercolors. I usually like to make them as bright as possible because I do find that there's certain limitations to how bright you can make watercolors anyway, so I like to achieve as much as I can, but it was really nice to be able to rein that in a little bit with this piece and let more desaturated, softer kind of colors shine for once. And I did do something a bit different with how I painted her skin. So not only did I let it be a little bit more desaturated, I actually chose to use one of my more opaque watercolors for the base of the skin, which I almost never do for any color. I love being able to layer the translucent watercolors because I think that's one of those special things about watercolors. But I don't know, I felt like experimenting a bit with it. It looked really pretty in the pan, so I just chose this nice milky peachy color. And I don't know, I think I kind of liked it, especially as the base layer of the skin. It did have a little bit more of this like creamy quality to it visually. So I don't know, I think I'll have to do a little bit more tests as far as building up skin like that. I think I'll always prefer going in with my translucent paints and build it up, but it might be something that I could go more into and really figure out what is the difference visually, where I can use it that I'll get an actual impact, where would other places be better suited for just the translucent. I don't know. Let me know if you guys have any experience in working with more opaque watercolors. If you have a certain method for working with them or integrating them into your pieces, I would love to hear it. But as almost always, I like to go in with quinacridone violet for the shadow on the skin, or at least that is the base cooling factor for the shadows on the skin. I love this. It's like this beautiful, perfect, warm purple color that works great for shadows, but still meshes well with the warmer skin tones that you would have. This one, I actually took some of the base color and then added that quinacridone violet into the paint so that it wasn't just starkly that purple, which sometimes I love the look of. But again, with this one, I did want it to be softer and hazier. Shadow Violet. I had to go look that up. I cannot remember what it was called. This one is also from Daniel Smith, and this one is one that I don't use as much as I would like because it does have that beautiful granulation to it. It's this neutral color, but it adds so much life and vibrancy to what would normally be a very stagnant kind of a color. It has, I think it's orange pigments in it, as well as these purples, so it has this really beautiful split of warm and cool while still overall having that really neutral impact to it. That's what I used as the base for her hair, and then I added a little bit of a brown to warm it up a bit so it did have what I wanted originally to have, that almost mousy brown color to it, but mostly it ended up more of a gray. I ended up leaning a lot more into the Shadow Violet, which I'm not unhappy about. I love this paint. It really is so beautiful. I just need to be able to incorporate it into my process with figuring out how to really get the most impact from a granulating paint like this. Okay, so now that I'm actually painting the background, there are a few little techniques that I love to use to really enhance the granulation of a paint. Of course, the first thing that really does help that stand out is using cold press paper. I'm using hot press, which means that you just get a different type of texture with cold press. It really does help those different pigments capture at different levels, so it does really make it pop. But for this, I just had to lean into the tools that I did have. So I like to mix up the paint and then let it sit just a little bit before I start using it. That's because the different paints will settle differently in that pool of paint on my palette. So when I reach in and I get some paint on my brush, it's not perfectly mixed together, so that it does allow that granulation to just start right off the bat, right from the very beginning of coming off of the palette. I also like to have a little bit of either the fresh pigment, the paint itself on my palette, or I like to have just a much richer, denser pool of that paint where I have less water mixed in, and then as I as I paint it onto my painting, I like to take my brush and pick up a little bit of that really rich pigment and then drop it into the wet paint that's already on my paper, and that just really helps the granulation explode almost from that point. I love being able to play with the natural texture that comes from watercolors like that, and with granulating paints like this, there's just so much more to work with. And for the pillow, I decided to warm it up just a bit from the background green so that there was more variation than just in the values, which is something that I almost always fall into that trap where I want something that's the same color to have variation to it so that different elements can stand out. I almost always just lean into changing the value, but I really like being able to have more interest to a piece. So this, it leans a little bit more into the yellow green, which I do think helps bridge between her shirt and the surface that she's actually laying on. But for this pillow, I lost the footage for the very last part of it, so I am so sorry for that very dissatisfying ending for this piece. And then I just added the last final little touches. I gave the pillowcase a pattern that has little X's on it, and then I added some white highlights to her skin and a little bit to her hair. And I do have this painting available at my shop. There's a link right down at the top of the description. I also have a link to the tools that I use to create this painting as well. And I do want to give a huge thank you to my patrons over on my Patreon. You guys are absolutely incredible as always. I cannot do this without your support, so thank you so much for that. I have a link to my Patreon if any of you are interested in checking that out. But yeah, that is it for this week. I'll be back next week with another art video, so thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you then.